speaking to different panelists with the questions that have come in. So for Provost Ken Peterson, I'm unmuting you right now. At least I thought I was.
Yep, I'm good. I'm
okay.
unmuted.
Thank you. So our first question, Dr. Peterson, tell us about the difference between in-person, hybrid, and remote. What percentages of classes will be taught each way, and what will that change depending on the conditions?
Sure. So let me talk a little bit about the terminology, which has evolved over the last several weeks for sure. When we talk about hybrid or in-person, we're really talking about course modalities. When we talk about remote, we're typically talking about the distance between where the class is being taught and where the student is sitting. So a remote learner might be in their hometown with their parents, or they might be in their residence hall, but typically not with the other students face to face. We've actually been using the term Fuman Flex a lot to describe courses that meet the following criteria. A portion of the students will be attending face-to-face with the professor, and a portion of the students will be participating in the class remotely throughout the semester, either temporarily or for the whole semester. And courses that are taught in that manner, we're calling Fuman Flex courses. Fuman Flex courses would include both our quote in-person courses and our hybrid courses. And the difference between in-person and hybrid really speaks to the number of class sessions that have a face-to-face component to it. So we might have professors who are teaching Tuesday face-to-face and Thursday remotely, and that would be a hybrid course, but there would be a significant face-to-face component to that course. The in-person courses typically will be meeting face-to-face every day, typically. But both of those courses will generally have remote learners as well. Now, why might we have remote learners? Well, a significant portion of our students, somewhere around 11%, I think now, 12%, 11%, have elected to take courses online from home this semester. And so they will be enrolled in a number of courses. We also anticipate, because of the conditions, a number of students having to go into quarantine or isolation for 2-week periods at a time. And we want them to be able to stay on track with their academics, and so we want them to be able to take their courses remotely where possible. And so they might be remote learners as well. In addition, we have our online learners, and as I mentioned, they are about 10 or 11% of our student body. When we look at our courses themselves, about 51% of our courses are designated as in-person, i.e. Fuman Flex, but typically meeting in person as well. And about 16% of our courses will be hybrid. So that would be 2/3 of our courses with significant in-person components and offered typically in the Fuman Flex format. About 1/3 of our courses will be offered in an online format only, and this was done to accommodate faculty who had a desire to teach remotely or had an underlying health condition or whatever. Will the modality of instruction change depending on the circumstances this semester? It could. So if we have an outbreak on campus, for example, we might switch to fully online instruction for a period of time. If we anticipate this to be a short-term affair, then we might ask students to simply shelter in place in their residence halls or their apartments and continue to take their courses online. And we would expect everyone to then teach online. It would look a little bit like it did in the spring, except we wouldn't be sending the students home. If we anticipate a larger challenge, that is one that we don't expect to go away or that we can manage, then we might at that point ask students to return as we had to do in the spring. We hope it doesn't get to that. Obviously, we're planning as much as we can to try to prevent that, but we all know that it could happen.
Thank you, Dr. Peterson. Next question is for Vice President Carson. Tell us about the phased plan. Why are we bringing in sophomores and juniors later? And why do sophomores and juniors who come early, such as RAs or the student athletes, have to wait to start taking their classes in person?
Great, thank you, Sharon. Good morning, everyone. First off, I think the thing to say is that our various teams on campus have looked at various contingency plans as we started to look at what was in the best interest of our students and our faculty and staff for the fall. And where we landed is this phased approach. And, the whole purpose behind a phased approach really is to mitigate transmission and exposures as much as we can while still offering an on-campus experience. So the way we wanted to go about doing this was to lower density and to bring people in and bring students in waves. That way we can also, as you all can imagine, we've created a lot of health monitoring systems, contact tracing, our health center, adjusting their practices, their telehealth, and all of those things to accommodate this. And so doing this in waves also allows us to see how our campus responds, how our students respond, and provides about a 3.5-week window there in case we see issues that we need to adjust and change. So that's kind of the why. The first years we landed on, if you think developmentally, first years, it's incredibly important for them to launch well, to get started well, and they are only partly through their orientation program. So we wanted them to be here on campus, finish their orientation, their advising, adjusting their schedules, getting acclimated to campus life, adjusting from the transition from high school to college, as well as meet their roommates, hallmates, and begin to get kind of socially acclimated as well. But obviously under a new normal with health and safety and hygiene protocols in place. The seniors we brought in developmentally because many of them have capstone courses and experiences in their majors that are important to have that great interpersonal connection from the day they get here, as well as many of them will be in career interviews, graduate interviews, but particularly the career services component. Many of the majors that kicks off as soon as they get back to campus. And so we wanted them to have that leg in for that as well. But then there's another reason that we brought those two classes together, and one of which is we know through our data that seniors and first-year students typically have the least number of overlap classes where they share in class. And so again, that allows our density to start out lower, even in the classroom experience. And then a campus living standpoint, the seniors and the first-year students live the furthest from each other and have the least connection. So again, that allows us some time to acclimate. It also brings our senior most mature students in, the ones who actually run a lot of our student organizations, to begin to make those protocols and adjustments to the organizational and social life on campus. It was mentioned that we have had some students that were early arrivals. We were very restrictive on that. We brought back, obviously, the RAs and the orientation leaders. Some of them are in that second and third year classes. And the reason for not allowing them to go to class right away is, again, to allow for this density in the classrooms to start out, but also it's an equity issue with our second and third year students so that they all start at the same place in their classes from a remote standpoint. The other students that have come in early is in a phased approach has been our fall student athletes. We've been bringing them in following NCAA and Southern Conference guidelines, and those students have been tested. That is the one asymptomatic testing that we've done as they came in. and we're able to quarantine them. I think that's answered all of those questions.
Thank you so much. So our next question is for Susan Maddox, Vice President Maddox. I've just asked you to go ahead and unmute. So the question is, what effect will the phased plan and some student learning remotely have on our revenues? If all students are sent home early for remote-only instruction, do you anticipate more budget impacts?
Thank you, Sharon. And I want to start by thanking all of you on the phone. You know, when we had to send students home in the spring, we did have a budget deficit, and everybody pulled together with reduced spending and the things that we stopped on campus to be able to balance the revenues with the expenses. And we do have a balanced operating budget for the last fiscal year. So thank you for that. So this fiscal year, we are budgeting $27 million in room and board revenue. With the lower enrollment that we're expecting, that compares to $35 million in revenue last year. The impact of the phase-in plan and the students working remotely in the beginning is going to be estimated around $3 million. And we're currently working with the finance team right now to find ways to mitigate that revenue loss, and feel confident that we're going to be able to do that. If we do have to send students home this year like we did last year, for an extended period of time, as you know, Kim Peterson said earlier, there will be an issue that we have to deal with. We will have to work together to find ways that we can reduce our expenses in order to offset the revenue loss. I think the thing that we have to be ready for this year is just a very flexible, nimble year. And as things happen and change on campus, the same will have to happen with the operating budget. And so as each of you look at how you're spending money, if there's anything that you can delay, hold off, or keep in contingency until it's absolutely necessary, that would be beneficial to the entire campus. Thank you, Sharon.
Thank you, Susan. So our next question is for Dr. John Wheeler. John, I am going to ask you to unmute. So the question is, who are we testing? Students, faculty, and staff, and how? How will contact tracing work? Who will be quarantined and isolated, and where?
Great, thank you, Sharon. And again, it's a pleasure to be with you this morning. We've certainly had lots of questions over the last couple of months around testing. And in part, I think this is because many institutions are taking a variety of approaches. There are all kinds of different approaches and models out there based on where individual institutions are located and so on. So let me begin by saying that we have responded with a frequently asked questions document that's in the health and safety section of the Fuman focused website. It's much more detailed than I'll have a chance to probably discuss this morning. And if you haven't had a chance to look at that yet, it was posted relatively recently. I encourage you to do so. It gives a little bit more of the logic behind our decisions. But in regards to testing specifically, first and foremost, we are following the guidance of the Centers for Disease Control. We are following the guidance of South Carolina DHEC, of our PRISMA partners at PRISMA Health, the infectious disease experts that are located there, the guidance of our own clinical staff here at Fuman, and the support and guidance of our faculty epidemiologists. So up and down the line, there is support for the approach that we are taking for doing, in general, symptomatic testing, symptomatic-based testing, which means when a faculty member or a staff member or a student demonstrates symptoms that are consistent at the very earliest stages of a COVID infection, then if it's a student, they report to PRISMA Health through the Earl Student Health Center. They're identified automatically by the daily screening approach. Most of you are familiar with the LiveSafe app probably by now. For employees, if they are feeling under the weather with symptoms associated frequently with COVID, then that information goes to Human Resources. And of course, employees and students are encouraged to immediately call student health or human resource or their supervisor as appropriate to let them know of that situation. The testing process through an order is given immediately to students through the Student Health Center for employees. They are encouraged to be in contact with their primary care provider, not report to work until they have received information regarding that test, and to isolate until they have received information regarding that test. So that is the approach that we will take to both students and employees campus-wide, as opposed to a model that you might be familiar with referred to as asymptomatic testing. You heard Connie Carson refer to this just a few moments ago, which basically means screening everyone. And we've elected not to do that. I recognize that some schools are trying to take that approach. The reality is that if you screen everyone before they come to campus, by the time they get to campus, given the time for turnaround in the tests, the time for travel and so on, even if they were asymptomatic and tested positive, they would be allowed to return to campus. It's a 10-day period if they're asymptomatic. And so it really doesn't do that much good to do that as a pre-entry screen a week or so or more in advance of the time that they actually arrive on campus. And that's the turnaround time that's really required to make that feasible. The alternatives in trying to do that logistically on campus, and again, the benefits of that a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks down the road are not proven at all. They are probably limited in nature, and that's why all of these organizations have come down with the same recommendations in regard to this mass testing approach at this point. The only alternative there would be if you were going to test every student multiple times a week over the course of the entire term, which is an investment in literally millions of dollars, and again, does not protect anyone from being susceptible to generating a COVID infection. It simply reduces potentially the length of time required to identify that individual. There are 1 or 2 schools that are trying to adopt that approach nationally. We'll see if that investment is really worth it. From our perspective, the far more important piece of this here is changing behaviors. And our success this term at Fuman is going to be wholly dependent, not on our testing protocol, but on how our employees and particularly how our students respond to the need to socially distance, to wear masks, to operate in smaller social circles, to be aware, self-aware in that respect, to maintain a contact log, for example, to do things that we know to help reduce viral spread. We know these behaviors work, and if we adopt those and we're successful in that approach, then we can be successful. De-densification would be another one of those approaches in that regard. When it comes to contact tracing, the goal here is to identify as quickly as possible individuals who have spent an appreciable amount of time with someone who has tested positive for COVID. And so the first part of that process involves asking an individual who is symptomatic to list, and working with a contact tracer and working with a professional, those individuals with whom they have had a close contact. And that's typically defined as being within 6 feet for a time span of 15 minutes. That's what's considered to be a close contact. Based on that information, then if the individual who is symptomatic is tested, and again, recognize that more often than not, those tests come back negative, but if they come back positive, then immediately our contact tracing team will contact the individuals who are considered to be close contacts and advise them to quarantine. The quarantine period is 14 days. So as an employee, that would mean remaining at home for 14 days before returning to work. For a student, it means either returning home, and most of our students have, in fact, decided to return home for a quarantine period if they're instructed to do so, or to be isolated in a room with a private bathroom on campus as a quarantine space. Those spaces have been identified in housing and are available. Students who are testing positive or who initially demonstrate symptoms are immediately placed into isolation, which means that they also go into a private room with a private bath and are separated from the population until that test comes back. Again, if the test comes back positive and it's possible for them to return home, then they do so, and they are refrained from returning to class for a minimum period of 10 days. It can be longer depending on their particular symptoms, but they require approval from the student health center to be able to return to class. So that's the general protocol for contact tracing, for isolation and quarantine for employees. They need to check with human resources when they're ready to return to work if they have been caught COVID positive. In terms of quarantine, again, the same period holds true. It's 14 days. We expect that students should be able to continue their work from home, and in some cases, that work may be fairly uninterrupted from the standpoint of our ability to operate remotely. Sharon, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Wheeler. So the next question is actually for me. So the question is talking about quarantine. So if an employee is quarantined, do they work from home during that time? If they are infected while working or come into contact with someone who has the virus, do they need to be quarantined, and will they receive pay? So if an employee is quarantined because they've been exposed to COVID, they will be authorized to work from home if it's applicable. It will be important for employees to work directly with their manager regarding this, and of course for faculty, they will work directly with the dean's office. For those employees that are in quarantine or have the virus themselves, the university has robust leave options, such as sick time, vacation time. We now have floating holidays, and we also actually opened up the parameters around the wellness hours that are given to employees as well. So those are available. For those employees that cannot perform their work remotely but must be in quarantine, they may use these leave benefits for that time away. Our next question is for Jason Cassidy. Dr. Cassidy, I am going to ask you to unmute. So the question is, how will mask wearing and other social distancing requirements, particularly for students, be enforced on campus? Are faculty and staff expected to police this?
Thanks, Sharon. Great question. So a webpage has been developed for the Fuman Focus site that was uploaded yesterday. And it'll have all the information that I'm about to share. So you may want to reference that at some point. As you all know, all students and employees are required to acknowledge and agree to the shared responsibility that we all have to make our campus safe. And we're calling this the Paladin Promise. Abiding by the Paladin Promise is going to be essential to the health and safety of the Fuman community, and ultimately the successful completion of any in-person on-campus learning for the fall semester. So we are encouraging all students and employees to respectfully approach any individual or group who is not upholding the Paladin Promise, meaning maybe an individual not wearing a face covering indoors or keeping 6 feet apart, or they're exceeding room capacities, and request that they modify their behavior so that it will align with the promise. That said, members of the Fuman community are encouraged to give individuals the benefit of the doubt as we start up the semester. This is a culture change. This is behavior that we're all having to adjust to. So we all know that changing daily behavior takes time. And so our primary goal is to educate and modify behavior. Now, if this doesn't resolve the matter, or if reminding the offending party to uphold the promise is not a reasonable option for various reasons, individuals may make a report either anonymously or not. Violations may be reported to the Fuman Focused email or via the reporting feature on the Live Safe app. Faculty, staff, and coaches are expected to deny entry to any individual who enters a building, a classroom, a lab, office, or studio without any appropriate placed cloth face covering. Faculty, staff, and coaches should report instances of non-compliance of either personal distancing or other safety measures immediately to the Associate Academic Dean's office or to the Student Life office. To be clear though, reminding an individual to wear a face covering who is immediately compliant does not warrant an official report. We anticipate there will be students who are forgetful, they have it in their pocket when they're walking outdoors, and then when they walk in, they forget. We just need to remind folks, and when people are compliant in that setting, great, that's what we're working to modify behavior. We only need reports of students or others who are intentionally not being compliant. I want to encourage each one of us to really commit to holding each other and our students accountable. I know some of us, many of us probably don't like any sort of confrontation, but as you heard Dr. Wheeler, this is going to be really the indicator of whether we're successful or not this fall. So we need to hold each other accountable to the promise. Again, you heard Susan's financial update. We all know how important it is for Fuman to operate safely first and foremost, but to be in person this fall, if at all possible. And so we all need to do our part here to help make that happen. And again, we all are committing to this, so we need to role model this behavior as well for our students. If students or student organizations, including those students living off campus, put other Fuman students at risk, they will be subject to student conduct action. In particular, we've developed a new policy this year in the student handbook called the endangerment policy. Sanctions for violating this policy could include up to suspension, expulsion, or loss of recognition if it's a student org from the university. Students and student organizations who do not adhere to the Paladin Promise or other safety guidelines that we've outlined would be referred for disciplinary action and could face up to or face any of the following charges that we already have in our student conduct code. Could be classroom disruption, could be disorderly conduct, endangerment, failure to comply, or a violation of our off-campus conduct policy. Students found responsible for violating the student conduct code, we've developed a tiered system. So, for the first offense, again, our goal first and foremost is education. So it'd be a warning and an educational moment, if you will. A second offense would be serious. We're serious about what we're talking about here. So this is it. You're on probation. If you don't abide by the promise again, you're looking at removal from campus for the remainder of the semester. So a third offense would then be removal from campus. So if they're living on campus, they would have to return home and finish out the semester remotely. Or if they're a commuter, they would have to stay home and finish remotely. And they would lose their room and board expenses as well for doing so. A fourth offense or a really egregious offense, you could get to a third or fourth level sanction for a really egregious offense, would be suspension for the semester, meaning you can't even finish out remotely. So that's what we've set up for enforcing the policy, and we all have a hand in doing so appropriately throughout the fall.
Of course, I apologize. I was on mute as I was talking. Jason, the next question is actually for you as well. Are we limiting events and gatherings and public access to campus? Will we be able to invite speakers to campus? And how do we manage events off campus?
Sorry about that. I forgot I was next in line again. I muted myself. There are 2 pages on the Fuman Focus website that will provide guidance on these questions as well. One of them is campus visitors. The other is major campus events. At present, the Greenville community cannot access the campus, and that's going to continue for at least the first part of the semester. We want to get our students back on campus, get all of our employees back, and make sure that all of our being present together works out well. And as the semester progresses, we may start to allow community members to join us again. That's ultimately our end game. As you know, though, we are focusing on our students and employees first. So there should be no lake walking currently or for the first part of the semester by the external community. However, Fuman employees and dependents can come to campus and enjoy the outdoor spaces. So we're still limiting indoor access, but come and use the fields and the lake and the running and all those sorts of things. Departments and offices can invite alumni, parents, speakers, and other guests to campus. However, the host, meaning the office that invited them, is responsible for ensuring all safety and health protocols are followed. So if you invite a speaker to come and speak to students or to your team or whomever, you're responsible for making sure they've done the screening app and their temperature check, and that they're wearing the appropriate face coverings and they're practicing the physical distancing and so forth. That said, I think the default question in our planning for all of us this semester should always be to ask the question, can we achieve the same goal in a virtual setting? So, just like we're doing today, can we accomplish the same outcome or virtually the same outcome by utilizing remote ability? So all contractors and visitors need to be approved to enter campus buildings and should work through facility services for that approval. On the major campus events page, there are campus event policies and guidelines for indoor and outdoor events larger than 30 people in attendance. And I'll just give a couple of highlights there. Events of 30 or less do not need special approval, but must follow all the health and safety protocols for the campus. So if you have an event of 25 indoors, you need to make sure that that space can accommodate that with people 6 feet apart, again, practicing all of the same safety measures, face coverings and so forth we've been talking about. Also having a plan for disinfecting the space afterwards and so forth. Until further notice, though, there should not be any indoor events with an attendance larger than 30 in a singular space. And again, we need to get everybody back to campus, get acclimated to all of these safety measures, and we'll continue to monitor that. But we don't want to start out the semester with large group gatherings. As, again, Dr. Wheeler mentioned, small gatherings is kind of the key for success this fall. Approved gatherings of more than 30 must address the guiding questions that are in that planning process outlined on the major campus events page. So when we get to being able to have those type of events, there are some guidelines there. Right now, these guidelines would only be applicable to having outdoor events of more than 30, which we encourage. So fall orientations next week for new students, and we'll be having some outdoor activities with students in groups larger than 30. But we'll be practicing all those guidelines that are listed on that site. There is a subcommittee that's working on operating protocols for the approval process for larger events, and more information will be available soon about that. In general, Fuman-sponsored events off campus are currently suspended until further notice. This includes experiences, events, or gatherings that are credit-bearing, those that receive financial support from Fuman, those that are sponsored by student organizations or maybe offered by an academic or student life department or office.
Thank you, Jason. I appreciate it. So our next question is for Connie again. So how will the university manage students going back and forth between the campus and the community? And if some students are living off campus and taking classes on campus, will this increase the risk of infection?
So I think with the on and off campus movement, the students will all have taken the training that has been developed by our education subcommittee. And in that, the Paladin Promise that we've been talking about several times this morning. And that will be reinforced in their residential environments for first-year students and new transfers in their orientation programs in our student organizations. As far as commuter students coming to campus, they will have taken all of the same trainings and have the same requirements. And one of the things that we're doing with students is, of course, emphasizing the gathering sizes that Jason has mentioned and limiting the gathering sizes. And that includes with our social activities that might happen, whether on campus or off campus. And as you heard Jason say, anything sponsored by Fuman groups are not allowed to happen off campus. So that's one of the first sticks that we have there. And of course, we do have, as Jason mentioned earlier, conduct processes for both student organizations and individual students. But we want to start out, obviously, with the educational and training side. And so our Student Office of Involvement and Inclusion that oversees all the student organizations will do training with the student leaders on their groups, and also help them in thinking about how to become more creative. When they can do their meetings administratively virtually, they should. If they are small groups and can meet our requirements for in-person, under 30, then that will be allowed. If they're larger than that, then we're going to encourage the outdoor, but all of them with the health and safety protocols reinforced in all of those. So exposures are certainly an issue, and they're certainly in Greenville. We can't ignore the numbers that have been in Greenville. And we've certainly seen nationally what's going on with large groups of people, and particularly young people. And we've seen what's happened at other colleges that were operating this summer. All of those things, again, are being reinforced in various ways in student life and that education. And we certainly will continue to monitor those kind of things. But there will be students who have to go back and forth off campus. There will be students that have needed services off campus. There will be students who need to get certain types of grocery items and those things off campus. And so again, we're not locking them in, but we are certainly requesting and requiring of them in many ways to be on campus. And so we're trying to build up the on-campus presence of social life and student organizations, and trying to do those things more robustly on campus in small groups and pods, in cohort groups, and getting our student organizations behind that. And then in the messaging, even in the training, we involve student leaders from a diversity of students across campus in that messaging. And our Student Government Association has already been working with Greek student organizations and other student organizations, think about how can we adjust the Fuman student social culture, because we know that peer-on-peer education and is the way to get to this, that we can all say a lot of things and reinforce, but if the culture changes through the student body, that's going to be the most effective plan for that. So all of those things are in the works as we speak.
Thank you. And the next question actually is for you as well. Why are we limiting facilities for student use only, like the PAC and dining hall? When will those facilities open up for faculty and staff to use?
So this is probably, for all of us, faculty and staff, this is probably one of the big bummers because we're going to have to do our own meal thing for the foreseeable future. The reason we did that, as you all can imagine, is obviously students are our first priority. But in all of those dining facilities, for example, we've had to lower the density. So the dining hall, for example, as you all know, is a very large place, and they have done an amazing job of adjusting how they are handling the dining to ensure value for our students and the good quality. But the number of seats in the place has gone from like 1,100 to 400. And so we need all of the facilities to handle the volume of the student body. And so that kind of explains to you with the lower density and the health and safety precautions that we need to do and the extra sanitization we need to do in those places. The PAC, very similar situation. For those who are in health sciences, they've already seen the adjustments that have been made. We want our students to be able to have priority in recreation, but also in the academic requirements that involve the PAC. And so we've had to move the equipment out to get it spaced for the social distancing. There'll be masking while they're using that equipment, et cetera. So the priority is students. But the good news is I know the Health and Wellbeing Wellness Employee Committee on campus, as well as the PAC staff, are looking at ways to offer outdoor opportunities, because we know that health and recreation and well-being are important to our faculty and staff as well. And so looking at ways to perhaps be more creative and do that outside of those venues.
Thank you so much, Connie. So our next question is back to Ken Peterson, Provost Peterson. Class times are being adjusted to reduce congestion in academic buildings. What else are we doing in this regard? Will students be allowed to study in the library? Can they use classrooms outside of class hours? And will faculty have full access to their offices?
Sure, thanks, Sharon. Just to clarify for those of you who aren't familiar with the course schedule, what the author of the question is referring to is that we've added time between classes. So classes will have either 20 or 30 minutes in between them. Usually it's 10 minutes or 15 minutes. And so the purpose of that is to make the ingress and egress in those classroom buildings less dense, and hopefully then make everyone a little bit safer and healthier in the long run. The other things that we've done is reduce the seating in classrooms. So we've drastically reduced the density in our academic classes. In some cases, we did this by reducing the course capacity and simply making some of the chairs off limits, and then spreading the chairs out so that there's a full 6 feet in between them. That's really important from a health and safety point of view. It's important from a practical point of view, because if you are not inside the 6 foot limit, you would not have to be quarantined if the person sitting next to you tested positive. So it has both health and safety implications and practical implications for other students if someone comes down with a positive test. The other things that we've done are move classes to non-traditional classroom spaces that are larger. So if we have a somewhat larger class and it's not easy to reduce the capacity, we've tried to find a location that was suitable for the size of the class so that everyone could be socially distanced or physically distanced, really, in the class. Dean Cass and others have worked closely with department chairs and faculty in some cases to create or encourage high flex courses that would bring a portion of the students into the classroom on one day and a portion the other day. And on the off day, students would be taking the course remotely. That's another way that we've reduced density in the classrooms. Students would be allowed to use the library for studying and for all of the normal library purposes, but they would have to follow the health and safety protocols there as well. Masking, social distancing, et cetera. And then we would have cleaning protocols as well. Faculty, we expect to have full access to their offices. The same rules apply: social distancing, masking, cleaning, hand washing is encouraged, of course, throughout the semester. I want to remind everybody, though, that we are encouraging still meetings that can take place effectively in a remote format, like a Zoom format, should be conducted in that way. So we think that we can reduce contacts and reduce density elsewhere by simply managing the things we choose to do in person and the things we choose to do remotely. So we want everybody to feel like that's still part of our charge. If we can do it effectively remotely, we should do it effectively remotely, and thereby reduce the density and the contacts. Let's see, have I covered everything? I guess the other thing with faculty offices is be mindful of those spaces that are shared within office suites. So if multiple people use a copy machine, for example, wipe it down before you use it, wipe it down after you use it. and everybody will be better off in the long run. So I think I've hit all of the highlights there.
Ken, before we move on, I do want us to move on to the chat line. We've had a few questions coming in, but I know that there was a popular question coming in about the use of tents, outdoor classrooms and other events. Is that available, and why or why not?
Sure. So we've been in conversation with some of our working groups in the planning effort to try to determine what the appropriate use of tents would be. They certainly have a role to play. There are certain kinds of activities that will be best conducted outdoors. And so, for example, there might be some student life activities where they should most effectively meet outdoors and in the fresh air. We have some classes, such as some studio art classes, that we think will be best supported by outdoor spaces because of the nature of the classes and the activities that are involved in those. Our groups have not recommended that we generally take classes outside. And that's because the classes that we have to offer this particular semester will almost by definition be technology intensive, because we anticipate remote learners, certainly remote learners in the first month because of the sophomores and juniors, remote learners because of quarantine and isolation, and remote learners because students have elected to remain home and take courses online. So tents are not going to be a good venue for a typical class because it's going to be difficult to get the technology running consistently and well in that environment. So that's how we're thinking about the use of tents. One other comment I forgot to mention in the last question as well is that for the foreseeable future, the classrooms will be off limits for students studying at night. Typically, our students like to use the classrooms as study spaces, but there will be nobody there to monitor them. The classrooms also have to be cleaned, etc. And so for the foreseeable future, classes will be offline for studying in the evening.
Thank you, Ken. This question in the chat, as we start transitioning to those, perhaps may be for you as well, Ken. There was a question that came in. Can anyone address potential adjustments in absent policies in the classroom? This may be a question for Connie as well.
Yeah, is Jeremy available? Jeremy might want to take that one. That's a
I'm here.
that's a dean question.
Absolutely. So the academic and curricular subcommittee of the fall planning team, which includes the chair of the academic policies committee as well as other faculty representatives, have proposed, and the faculty executive council has approved some adjustments to the add drop period to allow for a little more flexibility for students. But as we look at syllabuses and preparing attendance policies for the fall, flexibility and accommodation really need to be the concepts that drive our approach to attendance. So our health notification system will continue to function as it has. So if you have a student that is experiencing health difficulties that require flexibility and academic accommodation, you'll be notified through the regular channels. Our attendance regulations and everything still applies, but I think with any questions or concerns about attendance patterns, you should be reaching out to Tracy Carner and Kyle Longest in the academic dean's office so that they can be tracking students and getting them appropriately connected to our intervention team and other resources.
Jeremy, this may also be a question for you, or it could be for Jason Cassidy. What if a student says they have a medical waiver? Will they be required to produce it? I'm assuming we're talking about masks. So Jason, I'm also going to ask you to unmute.
Yeah, like with any accommodation, need to work through the SOAR office. So if a student says that they have some sort of medical permission or need, that needs to funnel through SOAR, and then we will work with that student and any professor that might have that student in class to work through the solution for that.
Great. I'm just going through the messages that are starting to come in now. So there was a question if the dining facilities and common kitchen areas are no longer usable, what do faculty and staff do? So I just wanted to point out in the return to campus training, there will still be the library cafe and also traditions at the golf course, and also the Starbucks cafe. So there will still be food options available through those mechanisms. And they are coming in fast and furious now, so hold on just one moment. So the question is, do we need to wipe down desks after every class, or who is responsible for that? Let's see, Rick, if you are on. I do not see Rick. He must have dropped off. Connie will take that, so go ahead, Connie.
Well, Rick is actually on. So
Oh, he is?
unmute
I
him.
don't.
Mm-hmm.
Can you he may not be able to unmute himself. I don't see him.
Rick, are you able to unmute yourself?
Oh, hold on. He waved at me. I see him. There you go.
Okay.
There you go. Sorry about that.
Sure. Yeah, what in between classes, what we'll be supplying disinfectant wipes to all classroom and traditional and untraditional classroom areas. And we ask that the faculty and the students self-clean either before or behind themselves, and our custodial staff will disinfect classrooms 2 to 3 times a day. So obviously the number of classrooms and course options for the semester exceeds our capacity to go in after every class. So we will rely on faculty and students to self-clean as they need to, and we will support the disinfecting 2 to 3 times a day per those spaces.
Thank you, Rick. We have had several messages come in, and Ken, I'm going to ask you to unmute. Has there been a determined specific number of infections or outbreak that would cause the community to stay in place or shut down?
Yeah, so we don't have a single variable like that we're monitoring, but we have a kind of dashboard of multiple variables that we're watching. So on campus, we'll be looking clearly at the number of positive tests that we're getting in a particular period of time. We'll be looking at the trajectory of that. Is it increasing? Is it decreasing? We'll be looking at the availability of quarantine and isolation space. We'll be looking at infections in employees, faculty, and staff. So there are a number of things that we'll be keeping our eye on, and then we will make the call depending on both the level and the trajectory of change in those variables.
Great, thank you. So a question came from a faculty member. While teaching 2 classes back to back, may I wear a clear mask, personal protective equipment like a dentist or doctors wear? I am not sure who would like to answer that question. I think from an institutional standpoint, I think we are all looking at different types of personal protective equipment as it relates especially to someone's underlying health conditions, but I am going to let Dr. Wheeler answer that.
Yes, great question. And yes, clear masks may be worn. There will certainly be cases where students with particular need to be able to read lips, for example, and so on in certain courses would benefit from that capacity. So there are actually two options there. One are clear masks, the other are face shields. And so for faculty only who are located at the front of a classroom teaching, face shields in that one instance are permitted, and the face shields must be curved. They must drop below the chin, but obviously they can be transparent, and so that makes that an easier approach as well. So that's really up to the individual faculty member. Facilities has those face shields that are approved for use in stock, and so by contacting Rick Chotsky, you can arrange to have one of those face shields if you feel like that would be the best approach for your particular classroom.
Thank you, Dr. Wheeler. We did have a question regarding fall athletics. Fall athletics being canceled in light of new policies about off-campus events and student group sizes. I don't know if Jason Donnelly is on. Do not see Jason. I should have also let everyone know that we will be monitoring these questions and chats that have come in. We have the ability to record them as we've recorded the session. And so we will certainly try to get these frequently asked questions out to the community as well if we did not answer your specific question. There was a question that has actually come in 3 times about being tested although we are changing a health carrier. There should be no disruption with anyone's coverage in terms of providers, but if there is a concern, we would certainly want our employees to reach out to Human Resource and talk to us about that. The Student Health Center will not be testing employees. And right now, our employee center, our health center is not open yet. So if you do have concerns about that in terms of your provider, please feel free to reach out to my office. I'm just going to go through here real quickly to see if I had any more questions that have come up. Oh, I've got one message. Oh. Connie, if you could unmute yourself. Would you mind possibly answering the question about the gatherings and athletics?
Sure, I'll be glad to do that. So obviously, being a Division I athletic program, we've brought student athletes back in those waves, as I've mentioned. What we don't have is the answer from the Southern Conference, of which we belong, as to their plan. They are delaying the start of competitions. And as you all have probably seen on nationally, a lot of the other athletic conferences have made decisions that impact the other conferences. And so this week, I know there are meetings of the Southern Conference presidents and athletic directors where decisions will be made, and we will get those announcements out. But we do know that the Southern Conference had already delayed when they would begin competitions at the least. The other thing I'll mention while I've got the ground here is club sports, which are student organizations. Most of them are in leagues. Those leagues are not playing this fall. And so club sports, which is a very different kind of way in which students participate, but certainly we have a large number of students who participate in club sports that's run out of campus recreation. They will obviously not be playing this fall. They will have limits about how they can keep up their training. Again, meeting all the social distance, nothing formal, but individually and in small pods. Sharon, was there another piece to that?
No, I don't believe so. So we are over our time, past 11 o'clock. And like I said, we will make sure that we capture the questions that have come through our chat line and try to get all those answers out to everyone. But before we head out, I would ask Dr. Davis if there are any closing comments that you would like to make.
I just want to thank everybody for their time today, flexibility. There's still uncertainty, but know that we'll continue to monitor things very closely. We're open to your ideas and suggestions, and Ken and Connie, as the leaders of our operating group, will be, I know, happy to have conversations with you. So as we kick off this fall semester, again, it's great to see so many faces on the screen. Best wishes, and let's do this thing. We can do it. We're firm and focused, and we know that we have this this great university that's full of great faculty, staff, and students. So enjoy the semester, and I look forward to seeing you soon, even if I can't hug you, and you know I'm a hugger. So one of these days. Take care.
Thank you, Dr. Davis. The last thing that I would like to say is I invite all faculty and staff to submit any additional questions that they have, either to the appropriate office, or you're welcome to send them to furman.focused@furman.edu. And we will try to get those answers to you as soon as we possibly can. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this morning.